morning, everybody. My name is Katrina Brosnan and I'm the Talent Development Lead in AIB. And it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all this morning to this, our second Masterclass in our Leaders Enabling a Difference LEAD programme. The first Masterclass, hosted by Pedro Angulo, focused on how we as leaders can be at our best in what we do and how we can cast a positive shadow. For anybody who didn't have the opportunity to attend, the first Masterclass is available on playback, and I would strongly encourage you to take that time, look, listen and learn. It was a really, really excellent event. This morning's Masterclass is following the same theme of how we can be at our best and really truly looking at that through the lens of resilience. To lead our discussion, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Lyons. Alan is an internationally renowned coach, trainer and keynote speaker. He's passionate about the area of supporting leaders to perform at an optimal level, to embrace change and to build resilience. So without further ado, I'd love to hand you over to Alan, and I hope each and every one of you enjoyed and take something great from today. Alan.
Many thanks, Katrina. I'm also very aware that it's very difficult to come after Pedro Angulo. It's a bit like coming after never working with children and pets. It's the same thing, but we'll try and live up to it. And thanks for tuning in this morning, especially after football last night, etc. So my name's, as Katrina was saying, Lyons. I am a business psychologist. I actually started life as a counselling psychologist, but that was a bit tricky doing that all day. So I moved into the space of business and sports psychology, but we very much use the same behavioural science to help us do that. We're going to look at leadership resilience today, which is so topical. It's everywhere, isn't it? Because we all went, I suppose, at the beginning of this pandemic from working from home, felt like a bit of a perk, didn't it? And now we all felt trapped very quickly, from being a perk to being trapped overnight. Now, we're going to look at some well-being conversations to hopefully get you back from not feeling so trapped anymore and back to being a perk and being able to do it purposefully. And it's about conversations, and you're all leaders. And let's be honest about this, you're going to do a whole load of inputs in leadership, but leadership, in essence, is just a bunch of talk, but very important talk. And I'm going to share with you how to get the most out of that. And I remember what I love about this time that we're all going through a kind of a speed wobble together with the pandemic. We're talking about, look at this, we have leadership resilience. Because even at the crash, which you guys know, the banking crisis last time, 2007, 2008, if there was something wrong with you, if you didn't feel great, leaders didn't really discuss it with you. You were given an EAP card, you know, the employee assistance program, as if there was something wrong with you, and go off and get yourself sorted out. But we didn't have that conversation. The reality is we are all having a normal reaction to an abnormal situation, and actually having the bravery and vulnerability to talk about it, that's really healthy. Now, I know they're doing it because we know that teams that feel higher sense of well-being and resilience perform better. Okay, so all the research is there, so the business case, Harvard have gone to town on it. But it is great that we're able to be more vulnerable and more connected with each other. So I'm going to do that, which I'm going to look at some useful conversations, because remember, leadership is just a bunch of talk. These conversations will enable you to develop your own resilience and well-being, and in those that you lead. So let me share with you. Is change like this? Very complicated. It looks like, even where would you start? The clockwork mindset. You know, and there's a lot of change consultants out there and the big five, etc., who want us to feel that everything is this complicated. As if behind this there's some kind of secret manual or a DNA or a GPS that somebody understands. Now, it's reassuring to think that there is. They come in and they tell us, don't worry, we know how AIB works. We'll work it all out for you. You just sit back. And then we kind of get dependent on them. We don't know what they're doing. And they head off when we're not sure what's going on. It's probably not like this. Change is not unnatural. Change is not even, something that we're not born to do. In fact, we are all natural born change agents. And that's a really interesting thing. So it's not a clockwork mindset because nobody knows how everything works. It's much more likely that it's like this. That we're coming down a rapid. A lot of it is out of our control. But we can learn to kind of, pivot, tweak, grab a paddle, grab a helmet, grab, a life jacket, whatever it is, to make ourselves be able to take a positive approach to change. That's more useful, that's more real, and it's more honest, to be honest with you. I was reading Colin Hunt's interview. He did a great interview with the Financial Times just recently. And in he was talking really about this. He was talking about the transformation and change that has happened in AIB since the pandemic. But he was saying if we had planned for it, we would have got all these consultants in, we would have had loads of committees, you would have been working on this framework. However, the result in his estimations would have been the same. So think about that, because he was working, we were forced to work from this. And it's a really good time to make change when there's a pandemic, because people who are generally conservatives, who are traditionalists, who don't engage in change, everybody's open for being disruptive. And the research is there to show that even if you're somebody who doesn't engage in change during a pandemic, it's the time to do disruption. And you should think about this as leaders as we move from the hybrid working or the kind of returning to the office. Don't just copy and paste it. I'm going to share with you some ideas for how do we actually keep the bits that went well and adapt and flex to make it even better. So we can use this time of change to come back and not just do things as usual, but actually to make them better. So let's have a look at this. Resilient cultures. So the idea here is that too many organizations and teams leave building cultures to chance. Let's see what emerges. Let's see what happens. If you're not resilient, you're not suited to it. Rather, the business case here is that great cultures are designed intentionally. We can actually deliberately create, we've worked out the building blocks that can make you have a more resilient culture. For yourself, obviously, start, but then how do you have these conversations and bring other people with you along the journey? So there's loads of benefits to this, and that's why we're having this conversation, to be honest with you. That's why it's so big. It's, benefits of team resilience, where people are more engaged, they're more likely to be motivated, they're more likely to be productive, higher sense of well-being, less prone to absenteeism, stay with the business longer. Okay, so we all know the benefits are there, they're everywhere now. Resilience is linked to higher productivity, but also healthy high performance. Not just being on for the sake of being on, but actually healthy high performance. And that's what we're looking at, the conversation to do that. And that's what's going to be new, and that's what we can bring back. And if there's one positive from the pandemic, we can take that from it. So let's stand back a bit from this. Like, what is resilience? Because it's everywhere. Everybody's been asked to think about it, talk about it, but actually, what is it? Do we have a common definition for what it could mean? Well, I'll share with you one that is best in class. Resilience is to overcome, move on from unpleasant experience, which could overshadow our future, okay? Which could. To steer through everyday adversity, stress, and challenges, to bounce back from major setbacks or trauma. Now, this is interesting because Martin Seligman, you might know him, he is considered the father of positive psychology. Positive psychology being the science behind well-being and high performance. He did his whole research on learned helplessness. So his whole research in the 70s, and he's the biggest psychologist potentially in the world now in positive psychology. His research was looking at what causes people to have helplessness. And we looked at learned helplessness. Like, why do some kids fall behind in class? Because they get negative feedback, they doubt themselves, imposter syndrome in our world, and they slip back, they don't feel psychologically safe in the classroom, so they don't share, they don't engage, they don't interact. Now, the premise of his research was that that is learned. And what's wonderful, I was listening to him a couple of weeks ago only, we had him over in the Royal College of Surgeons, well, he zoomed in, because we've actually built in Dublin the first psychological, positive psychology health wing to help people recover from serious illness, first in Europe. So what we're going to cover today, they're using to help people to recover from illness. And he was over opening it up. But what was lovely about that, and by the way, if you go onto the Royal College of Surgeons website, you can see his talk on this. But what's lovely about that is he was saying all the research and what they've learned 30 years later, it's not learned helplessness. People don't learn to be helpless. It's actually our default. We don't have to learn to think about what's not going to work. It's natural. It's how we survive. We're primitive animals. We think we're very complicated. We're actually not. We're quite fearful. And that's our natural state. So we have to be intentional and deliberate about a different way of operating and thinking. And as leaders, that's your role. As leaders, it's to help people to be more intentional and deliberate, to be more resilient, so they can take a positive approach to change rather than a fearful one. And the fearful one isn't learned, it's actually a default, which is interesting. So, luckily for us, there's lots of models in well-being, etc. But this one I'm going to share with you today, these 5 pillars have been specifically scientifically validated to measure your levels of well-being for leadership in organizations. So it's not so much the life coaching or, those kind of more holistic approaches maybe outside of Workday Suite. These ones are only here because they specifically help you to lead better and be more resilient within the workplace. And that's why they're interesting. So we'll cover these together, but I'd like to have a little bit of interaction with you as well, because you'll learn more from interacting, okay? The first one you'll see is energy, which we'll look at. I suppose Pedro gave you a masterclass on that already. How's your energy? How's he starts? And that's important because your energy introduces you before you do. And in many ways, people are talking about the pandemic is creating leaders. Well, really, it's not so much creating leaders, but it's revealing them. So leaders are stepping forward now, and it's the ones who are managing themselves well in these 5 pillars who are being successful. And then it looks at the future focus, the second pillar, which we'll look at together. And that's really about being a dealer in hope. As leaders, you've got to be sharing a message about what good looks like. You've got to give an end in mind. And this is very tricky because the pandemic, for once, nobody actually knows what the end is. So then we have to co-create it. I was watching an AIB ad during the week, and that's what it was talking about. We don't know the future, but we can actually have an influence in co-creating it. And there's a lot of science and powerful messaging behind that. And then it looks at inner drive. So how do you keep up momentum in those dark moments? And it's not about being perfect, but it's about being aware. And in those dark moments, how do you keep up a momentum? And to keep your inner drive going, you must link it to your purpose. And then it's about flexible thinking, which is everything. If you don't flex your thinking, you'll be stuck with that clockwork mindset, complicated, hard, and you become quite... In fact, the inability to flex your thinking leads to a more hostile version of yourself. So you won't actually reveal yourself as a leader who can deal with change. You'll be more hostile version of yourself, and I'll share with you more about that shortly. And then strong relationships. Well, come here. We're not even in a room together. This is a huge area. That connectivity, the whole idea of isolation and loneliness that our people are having. Queen's University just did a research on loneliness, which actually shows the impact of loneliness on your health is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So it's all there. And that's in masses hiding behind these screens. So let's go through them together. The first one we're going to look at is rate your energy levels. As I said, Pedro talked to you about this before. But this is interesting because Deloitte came out and they do their reports, which are very good. In their latest one, they said, I took it down, 1 in 6 people are experiencing stress or anxiety and depression during the pandemic. 1 in 6. Now that's really interesting, isn't it? 1 in 6. Now, is that true? Absolutely not. It's 6 out of 6. Which one of us hasn't had those moments when it's been stressful? It's got to be 6 out of 6. So what are we saying here? Are we saying that Deloitte are wrong? It's not that Deloitte have it wrong, but invariably in psychology, what we know, when you ask somebody if they're stressed, they often say no. It's only after the event, it's only when the pandemic is over, some sense of normality is back, you'll actually reflect and go, God, that was a stressful period for me, but I got through it. So in the moment, you don't recognize yourself. That's why those stress questions don't really work, because most people always say, no, I'm okay. An interesting one as well for you as leaders to bear in mind, people who are more likely to say yes are probably the ones you don't have to worry about as much. So the ones that actually say they're worried about burnout are actually the least likely people to have burnout. It's your highly engaged people who we often ignore. We often go for the problem children. It's a highly engaged people who will answer, no, I'm not stressed, but they're more likely to suffer burnout than the ones who actually put their hands up for it, which is interesting. Also, during the pandemic, which has been interesting research came out from Fitbit, showing that more people than ever have engaged in non-gym exercises and stress reduction exercises, which is great, okay? So more people than ever, and you can see it out here, the bay, the open sea swimming, the bike lanes, people are racing around. So there is a lot of people doing a lot of good things for themselves, which is great. But when you look at that research, because I know I'm coaching people who have, and they look at that and they go, good God, I started the pandemic and working from home, having a bottle of red every night, thinking it was like being on holidays, and all of a sudden I got into this kind of negative pattern. And then you look at research that shows you everybody has been so healthy. Well, actually, it's not, when you go beneath the research, it's telling us something else a little bit. These people didn't suddenly start to become great open sea swimmers or yoga or whatever they were doing. They had done it a little bit, or they had inquired about it, or they had wanted to do it, but the pandemic enabled them to do it. And that's interesting because even in the new year, when it's very easy to work in psychology because everybody wants to change everything, but you're much better, rather than taking on lots of new things going forward, what did you work away at last year? What did you tip away at that you could really drag into this year? And that's, I think, what the Fitbit data is more useful when you look at it like that. So what I'd like to do is also look at your mood, and your mood is so important because how you manage your mood will directly impact whether you're creating a psychologically safe place with the people you're with. And how do you do this? Well, we all know Zoom fatigue. Zoom fatigue or Teams or Google Meets, whatever it is, that came out really early on, you know, and as psychologists we were quite sneery because there's no research on it. People were barely working from home for a week and they went, oh, I've got complete Zoom fatigue. So we thought it was just one of these pop psychology, not so accurate scientifically things. However, Stanford have done the first peer-reviewed paper on Zoom fatigue, and it does exist. And it makes sense when you look at it. If you Google it, you'll get the paper. And one of the things I took from it as well on Zoom fatigue is constant gaze. We always, like, I'm looking into a camera now rather than the people. You always have a constant gaze when you're online. You have to stare somebody in the eyes, which is quite unnatural because if you were back in the office, you don't just look at somebody in the eyes. In fact, when we do what is called microanalysis in therapeutic dialogue, which is looking at what happens between the therapist and the client, what you notice is when you ask somebody a question, a meaningful question hopefully, they generally look away, and they can look away for up to 6 seconds. And it's because they're reflecting, they're thinking, it allows their amygdala to go calm so they can really tap into the creative part of the brain. And then they come back and they answer you. And normally then what happens is the therapist looks away for about a second, and that's called grounding in the sequencing of communication. They ground what's been heard and they go back. That's how all conversations happen. It's natural. Now, and look out for the next time you're in a physical meeting with people. However, on this, we're not doing that. Somebody, your leader, or you as a leader, ask a direct report a question and you stare at each other and you're very unnatural. So that constant gaze, it's overwhelming, it's intimidating, it doesn't bring out the best responses in people, they don't feel psychologically safe. Another little tip I took from the peer-reviewed article was, if you find somebody tricky or even intimidating, and you have to have this session with them, they say often we have the person on the screen blown up too much. So their eyes are coming at us. And these are the very people that we don't enjoy their company. Now, as psychologists, we're meant to have unconditional regard, but you can still find some people tricky. And when these eyes are coming at you, big eyes and you're big, if you have a big MacBook or whatever, it's not very good. So the recommendation is you can even make their image smaller. As small as you like, actually. You can have you can have your boss or your direct report, a tiny little person on the screen. But it does help you make a more useful conversation. It's less intimidating. And the other thing that I took from it, and a lot of you will be in here doing this, is multitasking. Everybody invariably, because we're online all the time, is multitasking. And they took that, like, phenomenal amount of people are in meetings, and they're only half there because they're doing something else. They're setting up, well, it was homeschooling, they're, you know, doing something, they're emailing, they're setting up something else. Like, I know a lot of you right now are only half paying attention because you're multitasking. Now, I know it's not a mannerly thing, because if you were in the room, you'd be completely engaged. It's the setup of how we're learning. Everybody's multitasking. And in psychology, there's something called switching time, which shows that if you multitask, it takes you 25% longer to finish everything. So as you're constantly shopping and going from this and that, and we're only paying half attention. So think about that with Zoom fatigue. So this makes what we're going to cover now even more important for you guys as leaders, because as a leader, you will pick up and mirror that your leader more than anybody else, even more than your peers. Your leader's mood is the most important person. In fact, Jack Welch used to say, as a leader, when you're coming into work, if you don't have a smile on your face, he said, give yourself a smack before you get past reception, because the amount of people's performance you're going to impact, and not intentionally. So learn to manage your mood. as Katrina said, so you can be the best version of yourself. We're not trying to create new, different you, as if that's possible. People are always trying to change themselves to be a different person. You can't actually do it. You can actually become more enthusiastic about being a better version of yourself. So stretch your world, tap into what you enjoy and make more of it, rather than living your life as if one day I can be somebody else. Now is the time to actually just stretch and be more of yourself. And we're given this beautiful opportunity where we can be vulnerable and connect. So the mood is so important. And I'm going to show you a little mood map here, which is to think about. But there's 4 quadrants. We always like quadrants, but it's a great way to actually think about your mood and to bring the conversation into your peer groups, but also onto your team. So you see in the top left, high cortisol. You know that when you're feeling stressed. These are kind of control and command managers who it's intimidating, it's aggressive, antagonistic, short-tempered, stressed, angry, loud, snappy, distracted, irritable. Then you step in, you're kind of you're a hero. I get stuff done around here. You know, people are afraid of me, but I like it because it's productive. Well, I can do stuff if I'm afraid. It's just not very good stuff. You know, and those high cortisol stress, you can pick it up even on Zoom. You pick up that energy and it's intimidating. Nobody is likely to feel psychologically safe enough to contribute. So you say nothing, even when the person says, now does everybody agree? And then for your manager, what happens is you can't keep going at that level all the time. People talk about high performance as if, you know, you're constantly in 5th gear, which is just nonsense. You don't drive your car constantly in 5th gear. You have to know when to go into it and come out of it. But if you're not doing that, if you're not managing your energy, if you're not looking after yourself physically and what you eat, sleep, all that stuff that you know so much about, if we're not being deliberate and intentional about that, we end up here. And again, I'm only talking about the performance in work, but in terms of your own health, life, well-being, your family dynamics, it's important everywhere. And then what happens is, rather than downtime, you dip, you get exhausted, distracted, depressed, overwhelmed, fatigued. You worry, you're isolated, you're unhappy, you're sick. People get paranoid. You feel, the imposter syndrome. You don't like what you're thinking, etc. And that's because you're living in that. It's always on or really low. And then what we're looking at then is, well, how do you get that kind of good level of adrenaline where people are engaged and they're compelled, they're excited, and the dopamine and the serotonin, that's what we're looking for. The happy, it's a cocktail of happy hormones. But we all can do that by how we manage our energy and think about it, which is incredible. So what we're looking for, obviously, is the top right, where with good levels of dopamine and adrenaline, we've got highly productive, we're efficient, we're motivated, we're supportive, we're courageous, happy, focused, driven, energized, engaged. People are much more likely to share things maybe that didn't even work, in that environment, and we can learn from that, rather than just hiding things or only speaking up to say what I think my boss wants to hear. That's over on the left side. But what you'll notice, and this is really important, and great athletes do this all the time, we're not always looking to be there. That's nonsense. We spend a hell of a lot of time in the bottom right, which is creative, recovering, innovative, relaxed, reflective, refreshed, focused. Today is a bottom right one. Okay, for me it's probably hopefully a top right, but of a different role. But it's about, is there a couple of nuggets? Is there a couple of things that can make a difference to the way I do things? Because there's interesting research just out from Moreton University, which is very credible, showing that, bosses around the globe have been proven wrong because people are able to remain just as productive at home. And that's been proven out, left, right, and centre, in all kinds of roles. Not just kind of the civil service, it doesn't matter. Every job, people have proven that they're just as productive. However, the big gap is they are way less agile and innovative and creative. They're way less in the bottom right. That's something that they're working from home. We can keep the performance up, but we're not, planning for the future. We're not making a difference. We're not coming up with the creative stuff. And that's interesting. So, for yourself, we're not doing a workshop as it were, but for yourself, if you sketched out those 4 quadrants, red, grey, and then the ones over to the right, green, yellow, what puts you in each of them? And it says what percentage of your time, and we say in psychology, change happens where the awareness is. So this is a great activity, and Claire's going to send you on the slides, but it's a great activity to do because when we're coaching people, change happens where the awareness is. But first of all, you have to be aware of where you're spending your time, and then you can look to do something about it. So if energy is something you're looking to manage, and remember, Your mood can greatly, I don't know if you know a guy called Daniel Kahneman. He's a bigwig in our world. He wrote that great book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. He has a new body of research out, phenomenal, with a couple of other psychologists, called Noise. And he was even showing how there's an error in judgment can be radical simply from somebody managing their energy. From judges making, it's not bias, it's the same person making a different judgment on this, depending on their energy levels. So a judge in Israel, you're much more likely to get a harsher sentence in the afternoon, for instance, than in the morning, just after coffee. All of it's down to managing your energy. And if you think of it in your world, how you manage that energy can actually give a huge standard deviation difference in decision making, all because of how you feel. You have the biggest influence as a leader also. I'll mirror you. If my leader is in high red all the time, always to go, we don't realize it, but we mirror it. So this is what I would say to you. Attend to the mood map. Be careful of the high stress, exhausted. It's not give yourself a hard time about it. It is 6 out of 6. We've all had it. But how do you move to that healthy high performance? How do you keep engaged and revived? And how you do it, by the way, it's not rocket science. You even have a conversation about it. Because when you say things out loud, you actually make sense of what you're thinking. But keeping these little goals in your head, you'll never get to it. So share it with somebody, with your coach, with your team, etc. So, yeah. So, and then this is perfectly aligns to the AIB values. So be one team, bring your best self to work. So it's not saying, I was joking to Katrina there at the beginning when my wife always says to me, whatever you do, don't be yourself, you know, don't make a mess of it. So it's not about, you know, that imposter syndrome, pretending to be somebody else. It's actually trying to be more of yourself. That's more likely to be sustainable. And then the other one we're directly linked into, to eliminate complexity. Be resilient towards mistakes and failures and encourage learning from them. Well, you can't do that. Well, it's unlikely you'll do that if it's in the red. Most people say nothing, i.e. they don't feel psychologically safe. So these conversations around energy are a great way to start that. So what I'd like you to do, maybe if you can, because I can see answers up here. Now I know a lot of you are multitasking, so come back to me just for a second and answer this question. How would you notice that your team, or you, were spending more time on the right-hand side? Now, you learn more from each other rather than me. Anybody, I lecture on MBAs, I lecture on leadership in business schools, and it's never the notes or it's never the slides, it's the conversations you have together. That's something that's been lost a bit, as we know, in the virtual world, but we can actually capture a little bit of it here. So, I've Sinead Boyle. Sinead's having a cocktail. Oh, it's a cocktail of happy hormones. Love it. Okay. Well, you have form there as well, Sinead. Philip, helpful. Yeah. People are chatty and open. Absolutely. Claire, they're more engaged, more positive, and you've been noticing that. And that is huge. That used to be something we ignored. You leave your emotions at the door. You don't bring them to work, as if that's possible. But how you manage your energy in a skillful way, that is more likely to get high performance. Engaged, honest, positive, Mairead. Francis, definitely. Level of engagement, more engagement, very open. Smiling faces. Liz, having a smiling face, people will mirror that. And it's such an easy thing. Having a joyful nature allows, and it doesn't mean you're not taking things seriously, by the way, but it allows people to feel safe and to be able to tell you what they mightn't. Brendan, having fun with the world and people, love it. John Dowling, willing to be frank and honest rather than lip service. That's gold. Lip service is in the red. Jane, enthusiastic and positive. And there's a buzz in the office. You want to be there. It's energizing. Absolutely. David, good communication. Being inquisitive. Exactly. You care. You have a sense of wonder. You know, you're back to being a child. You're curious. You're creative. You're innovative. People saying, I was thinking about and have an idea. I love it, Sinead. Yeah. Tig, your team would be happy and enjoy coming to work. Exactly. You know, people take things too seriously. It doesn't mean that you're not taking your job seriously, but you need to lighten up to bring out the best in yourself. Because if you're intense, your amygdala, the emotional part of your brain goes off, and people feed off that. And if you're too intense, you're not going to play well. You're not going to engage well. Think about it. And I heard Southgate on the radio in here this morning. He said, we knew what we had to do last night, but we knew how we had to manage our energy, and we knew that we didn't want to get caught up and take things too seriously. And what he meant was, if they got so overwhelmed by the media and what they had to achieve, that could overwhelm their ability. Exact same thing. Infectious positivity, Sinead, absolutely. Have fun at work. Look, you're all saying the same thing. It's a beautiful pattern. Now, I better move on to the next pillar, but I much prefer to engage with your comments in the room. But we'll get through this framework. Now, the future focus. This is so important. And you've got to be, as a leader, I suppose, how do you do this? Because remember what I said to you about people default to what's not working. So we default not to have a future focus, And people are more afraid of uncertainty, our scientific research shows, than they are physical pain. I would prefer to have physical pain over not knowing. Now that's amazing research. And what does that mean for resilience and well-being? Well, lots. Because as leaders, our jobs are really to be dealers in hope. That was Napoleon Bonaparte. Even if we're not exactly sure where we're going, and nobody is, we need to be like Luke O'Neill and have a sense of hope and purpose. And it's a psychological capital of hope and purpose. Having a future focus drives people on through difficult times. We know that. All the research is there on it. Except you're much more likely, if your energy is low, you can see how these are interconnecting with each other. The cortisol, the adrenaline, we're feeling anxious, we're feeling, and people who are feeling anxious are intimidated. The reason I'm aggressive is because I'm afraid. So we're feeling afraid, and we're only focused on what we're not going to achieve or what could possibly go wrong, all the uncertainty. People who are in the red hate the uncertainty. And we all have moments when you have this. I'm not saying being perfect, but it's being aware that there's a different way to think here. Because they're talking, like words, remember I said at the beginning, leadership is just a bunch of talk. Words can literally transform how you feel about things. And that's why coaching and therapy, my world, is so important. You can transform how you feel about things by how you talk about things. Sigmund Freud said words were originally magic. Well, they still are. So how you use them is so important. Like in the States now, there's a bit of research coming out to show that 1 in 3 people, once they recover from COVID, are having serious mental health issues from anxiety and depression. So now they're saying, oh my God, not only does COVID make you sick, but even when you recover from the virus, you get a mental health issue. Is there a link between COVID making people mentally ill? Well, there's not, okay? Well, I shouldn't say that because the research is still open. Very unlikely. What's happening is it's the way people have been thinking about COVID, that when they catch it, it's like post-traumatic COVID disorder. It's the same thing. They can't believe they've caught it. They're trying not to spread it to their other members of their family. And then what happens is it's literally post-traumatic stress, post-traumatic COVID disorder. That's what's happening. It's more likely because of the way we're talking about it. Now, it won't make it go away, but it will make it less likely that we're much more likely to bounce back from it and be more resilient. So, we got to have hope. And remember what I said to you, people generally assume negative intent. So how do we do this? How do we do this as leaders, more importantly, having a sense of hope? Well, Viktor Frankl is a beautiful man, a psychiatrist. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. He was in Auschwitz during the Second World War, a Jewish psychiatrist. He was experimented on, tortured, degraded, horrible things. He noticed that any of his family members or friends in Auschwitz death camp who died had lost any sense of hope or meaning, which was easy, okay, to do in Auschwitz. But he visualized himself lecturing to his psychology students about having the sense of meaning and purpose would actually be able to drive you through the worst parts in your life. And luckily he got out. And he wrote this amazing book, Man's Search for Meaning, in 1946. But even after the last banking crisis, Harvard went to town on it. It's the same psychology. You can't give promotions. You can't give maybe the money we want, all that good stuff. But if you can tap in to a stronger sense of meaning and purpose, it will drive you through the horrors. It will get you through the worst parts. And that's what you guys have been doing for the last 10 years as well. And as he said here, everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, and that is how the last of our human freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Now, we have to be deliberate and intentional. And again, I'm putting it back onto you guys as leaders. It's how you have these conversations that will greatly help that. Do you remember Obama? Obama said, Irish people, your best days are ahead of you. That's all about hope. It's easy to talk about the problems. Everybody's going to be talking about the problems. You put on the radio, they mention the problems. You're at reception, everybody goes, how was your vaccine? How is this? So we're experts on problems. We don't have to worry about problems. We do have to worry about being dealers in hope. And that's what we're talking about here as leaders. So just to show you how important words are, as Sigmund Freud said, this is a guy called Michael Lewis, The Undoing Project. He's brilliant. He's a behavioral scientist. He also wrote the book Moneyball. He wrote a book on Trump recently, who hasn't? But he said, when you told people that they had the 90% chance of surviving surgery, 82% of patients opted for it. However, when you told them that they had 10% chance of dying from the surgery, which of course is just a different way of putting the same odds, only 54% chose the surgery. So there you go, it's all about words. Words can transform how you experience. So I'm actually giving you words or questions, which are even better, for 5 pillars of resilience, 5 well-being conversations. And here's one I'd like you to answer, if you could, again. If somehow working from home or return to the office, which I'm doing a lot of work with Google at the moment, we're looking at how to have well-being conversations between the managers and their employees when they're returning. And what's interesting about what we're doing with Google at the moment, the biggest stress point they found is the managers want to be back. A lot of their team don't, but the managers are stressed about how to have that conversation. So normally when you're stressed about how to have a conversation, we don't have it, which creates more problems. Also, the conversations is generally around what people are losing. However, and that's easy to have, this is a great question also to have. If somehow working from home, RTO, return to the office, turned out to be useful for you, how would you know? So if somehow working from home, returning to the office, turned out to be useful, if this new way of working turned out to be a little bit useful, how would you know? So in 6 months' time, if we went, you know what, I got something out of that. If you wouldn't mind taking even just 30 seconds to jot something down, but to remember the question also, and I'll have a look at the screen at your answers coming up in a second. And thanks for the last ones there, Mark, on starting a conversation with how are you. So important, because we're transactional, especially online. We just look in and we go straight into the business as usual, but having a conversation like how are you. Claire, answering the working from home, to be better work-life balance, and that's a huge thing now. What's really important to us is, gone front center. It's as if we needed a jolt to actually make us focus on what's important, because we all act as if we're going to live forever. We're all nearly gone, literally nearly gone. So this has given us a jolt to actually make a more meaningful approach. We have Sinead O'Toole, positive towards the situation, accepting the change, exactly. More fulfilled in work, happier, love it. Okay, thank you so much. Good, a better work-life balance, less rushing around. It's manic, isn't it? Happier, more content. Okay, keep them coming, but I need to go on to the next pillar just so I've covered everything with you. And the next one, it's around the inner drive. I've just written an article for the Examiner on this as well, which I'll send on to you, but it's really about building resilience through purpose. Well, how you keep up an inner drive is by linking it to a purpose, because we all catastrophize. We all have these thoughts happening all the time. You can think of those thinking traps there. Mark Twain has a lovely quote where he says, the worst things in my life have never actually happened to me. We're constantly catastrophizing. And there's a lovely bit of research by a psychologist called Killingsworth in Harvard, where he was showing that they're actually able to study people, what they're feeling as they were experiencing things. And what's interesting is 48% of the time, most people are thinking about something else. And the reason we do that is because we aren't enjoying the unpleasant experience we're going through, whether it's sitting on the kind of traffic on the way home, whatever it is. So 48% of the time, that's nearly half. We're actually not even thinking about what we're experiencing, we're thinking about something else. Now, what's really interesting about that research, it shows that 80% of the time where we go, it's actually more stressful than the actual experience we're having. So we use this as a cognitive achievement that other animals don't have. But actually, we don't think about the experience we're having because we're not enjoying it. And 80% of the time, the other thing we think of is actually less useful. Now, meditation is so wonderful there. Why? It gets you out of that thinking trap. You can breathe in, you can breathe out. your mind actually rests well on the breath. It stops you catastrophizing. And I know a lot of you are introduced to the mindfulness, and this is a great way with the thinking trap to do that. And these are quiet conversations to have with yourself. It's really to riding the wind of the mind, but it's about noticing progress. Progress will always happen, but people don't notice it, especially when we're not feeling resilient, especially when we haven't got the energy right, especially when we don't have a future focus. Like, we need to have a bigger why behind the what. So noticing progress is recognizing that, look, it isn't that change has started. It's always happening. We don't need the clockwork mindset, the fixed mindset, the consultants telling us what to do. It's happening all the time. And the youthful way to change is to notice youthful change and amplify it, to stretch our world rather than change them, as if we can change them, but we can enjoy them and become more enthusiastic about them more. So notice progress. How do you, as leaders, do that with your team? Ask them this question: what were your working from home bright spots? There's been many. We all know the issues, squabbling over who had to do the homeschooling, all of that stuff. We know the problems from working from home, internet going down. But with your team, what were the bright spots? And we look at how to bring elements, and that's the new hybrid working. What elements from not just the institutional concerns, but individual concerns first, then move on to the institutional. And that's a great way to do that, allowing people to feel that they're not losing the bright spots. Now, flexible thinking I was telling you about earlier. Adam Grant has just written this book on it, Think Again. He's a big organizational psychologist from Wharton. It's just out, but I love the book cover. Might have to change. We have a must read, Bill and Melinda Gates, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. So that's timing was, they obviously, they cover the knowing doing gap, okay? They put it into practice in action. But his book essentially is showing the inability to flex your thinking, and especially during a time of a pandemic, leads to hostility, as in you become a more hostile version, red version of yourself. You don't chill out, you don't allow people, you see things as permanent, but everything is impermanent. And we should, relax into that, because as I said, we are natural born change agents, and we should look at this time at a time to make those changes. But the way to keep your inner drive up is to have a slogan or a mantra, because the flexible thinking, the way to constantly be able to flex and think about things is to actually remind yourself. How do you go back and remind yourself? How do you actually keep up momentum? Now, I read Colin Hunt's interview in the Financial Times, and he had a great one where he said he described himself as a young man in a hurry. So you can think about the flexibility in his thinking there. A young man in a hurry. Now, I don't know if that's his slogan or was a throwaway comment in the interview, but there's a lovely one here. This is about getting your own leadership slogan. This is one I really like, which is by Tic Tac Yan, a Zen Buddhist monk you might know. But he talks about no mud, no lotus. And it's kind of the same thing Colin Hunt was saying. No mud, mud is the mess. Mud is the chaos, okay? And the lotus is the place we want, or the enlightenment in Buddhism. But it's all working well. But what we're saying is we can't have that without the mess. We are in the middle of the mess now. But the great thing about that mess is we can actually get somewhere better. Chaos is good news. Like if you have your own leadership slogan, Barack Obama's, yes we can, but come up with one, even craft one for your team, and it allows you to be flexible in your thinking. It allows you to keep up that inner drive, that momentum, so you can notice progress and realign your purpose. So my question to you there would be, what is your leadership slogan? You mightn't have one, but craft one. Share a bit of vulnerability with it. No mud, no lotus. A young man in a hurry. Yes, we can. Get everybody to do one. You will connect and feel psychologically safe and more productive if you feel that other people know your philosophy as well. Okay, now, the last one, but potentially the one that is being talked about the most, because we all feel socially awkward now, don't we? Even coming in here today. I do talks all the time. I was meant to be with Google last week in San Fran. I did it online. I'm with you guys. I should be in your lovely premises here. Well, I am, but we got cameras. So it's all very strange, isn't it? We all know what it feels like to be introverts now. But people feel socially awkward. They don't even like to meet people anymore. So people feel disconnected. So we need to use this opportunity to get more vulnerable. But the positives are, we've actually invited colleagues and leaders into our worlds a lot more, haven't we? Literally into our houses, into our bedrooms. People are being much more real. They're much more vulnerable, and that creates psychological safety. So How do we get connected? Somebody brilliantly said on the panel chat there, start with the how, because the very nature of the way we meet, we just go straight into business as usual. But we can miss so much because we don't have the water cooling moments. We don't have the conversations with each other. So take time to actually even have a meeting with no agenda. You know, so work it out. You don't have to meet to discuss things, just meet to catch up, because there's bits of gold in there that will help people to have a healthy high performance. And you know, don't forget to point out the positives. And as a team, it's so important. Don't worry about the negatives, because we default to that. We'll all get to them, but we have to be deliberate and intentional about the opposite. So high-performing teams share more than 5 times more positive feedback than low-performing teams. So start to do it. And I don't mean just, you know, start to notice what's going well, what people are doing well, and the stretch they're making. And be vulnerable. And be vulnerable and connect. I love this one. I actually captured this morning, which was sharing vulnerability. This is the Lego marketing manager, whereby his daughter was driving him demented, but she agreed to let him take his call if he agreed to do a pedicure. So again, those things are so wonderful. There's a famous one that happened a couple of weeks ago where there was a lawyer using Zoom filter by mistake. I'm not a cat. Let me play this for you. And it'd be a good one to play to your own team, and also to start to share your own, because that vulnerability will create connection. And it's something we never did before, and it's psychological.
Can you hear me, Judge? I did not know that Zoom could turn me into a cat, and I did not know that a cat Zoom could turn me into an internet celebrity, but it all happened in just a matter of hours.
Mr. Ponton, I believe you have a filter turned on in the video settings. You might want to take a look.
Can you hear me, Judge?
I can hear you. I think it's a filter.
It is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant here. She's trying to, but I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
I can see that.
Got on the Zoom. Everything seemed fine. My picture popped up. I was in the waiting room with the judge. When the judge called the case, I disappeared and a cat appeared instead of me, to my great surprise, of course, and took a little bit of time, and we finally figured out how to get rid of the cat video. In Texas, we have a phrase: you can't put toothpaste back in the tube. And if this was going to become an internet sensation, I just had to laugh at myself along with everybody else doing so, and roll with it.
Okay, so I'll share with you the question. As I said, leadership is a bunch of talk that will help you to be more vulnerable. But first of all, I just want to pick up on a slogan there that was put in by Philip, which I've lost now, but which he gave a great slogan there around people don't care until they know how much you care. I haven't done you justice, it was nicer than that. But again, and there was other slogans coming up there, but do get familiar with them. And slogans are really your leadership philosophy, but share them with people. And this one, share an epic working from home fail. Like, that will allow you to develop the growth mindset. Share something, be vulnerable, a moment that brought a smile when you were telling your partner the people you lived with, when you tried to do something at work, but because you're working from home, we're not used to it. What happened? Was it the pedicure with the child? The Zoom filter changing you into a cat? Get everybody to share that. You will start to create, because we're bonded by COVID. It's an interesting thing. We can create more social solidarity, but we have to start sharing these other things, not just always be picture perfect with my camera. Share the moments where it was a disaster. And it's actually something that will really help resilience, because we lighten up. We allow ourselves to be ourselves more. We don't take ourselves so seriously, and we can be more engaged and enjoy work. And my real business case for this is it's linked to high performance. It's not nonsense. People who feel that they can be themselves more, authentic leadership, will actually outperform. So there's a huge business case for it. So I'm going to open it up to questions now. but I want to leave you with my 5 top tips for these courageous well-being conversations. And the reason we call them courageous, and we're doing this with Google, is because they're easier to ignore. You have to share a bit of vulnerability to step into them. But by going first as leaders, other people will step into them also. In a way, Colin Hunt's interview with the Financial Times, I reckon that was a courageous well-being interview. Not so much the questions, but his answered. He shared vulnerability and connection there. Energy, check your mood to unlock healthy high performance. Just have a little check-in before you jump onto something. Are you managing your mood? You know, as Pedro would always say, manage your energy, but it will introduce you before you do. So always check your energy and your mood. People say it's hard to pick up on Zoom or Team, but we do pick it up, don't we? And we have Zoom fatigue. Not every call has to be, or meeting has to be online. Go out for a walk. People are more productive when they're walking. So start using the changes. If it's a difficult conversation, maybe don't stare at each other. Maybe have it while you're walking so it can be a more productive one. Check your mood. Go back to that mood meter. Sketch out those quadrants. Where are you living? And how could you be more deliberately living? And do it with your team, by the way. Psychological safety is created by coming up with the ideas together rather than telling your team how they're going to be in the green. Ask them how they know they're there. And the next one is the future focus. You can transform people's experience by how you speak, the words you use, so be really careful of them. So here's a great question. If somehow all of this turned out to be useful for you, how would you know? And there's some great answers up there as well. Inner drive. How do you keep up momentum? Will you link it to a stronger purpose? You know, and that's where, you know, I think they said the great resignation. Microsoft, 41% of people said they're going to resign. Well, a lot of that is because there's no inner drive. And it's not that we're looking for, you know, positive psychology is looking for meaning and well-being. But it's not that we have the opposite of well-being. It's not that we have mental health issues, but we're somewhere in the middle now, what psychologists are called languishing, where we're just a bit like, yeah. But we need to get people, your job is to get people to feel that they're not languishing anymore, but they're more meaningful and purposeful. And that's a great opportunity. And noticing the bright spots help that. It's the equivalent to keeping a gratitude journal. You know, notice what you want. People notice problems and they notice what they haven't achieved, and then we die. But we can actually do the opposite of that by being intentional. And then flexible thinking, craft your leadership slogan. And we have some great ones up there. But do craft it, have a bit of fun with it. And it's your brand, you'll enjoy it. You're actually going deeper in a way because you're linking it to your purpose. It's your leadership philosophy. You'll start to enjoy yourself and lighten up. And then lastly, strong relationships. Get vulnerable and connect. You know, we've all shared so much with each other. Let's use this solidarity and let's be bonded by the experience rather than just ignoring it and pretending we're just moving on. That lovely article in the Harvard Business Review this month by Linda Grattan, How to Get Hybrid Right. That's what she talks about. How to make sure that we get people's preferences and we share with each other so we can actually use what we've gone through to make it into a positive. Okay, so that is my talk done. I am now going to open it up. If anybody would like to make a comment, ask a question, and I'll just have a look here. There's some great things, and I'm sorry that I didn't spend more time because your comments are more interesting, obviously. And all cats look shrewd. Oh, working from home with kids, I have plenty of those epic fails. Love it, Sarah. Well, if you're here, I'd ask you to share. Pedicures are brilliant. Mike loves the pedicures. I burnt the potatoes because of multitasking. There you go. Not only does it take you over 20%, 25% longer to finish things, you burn stuff. And I hope that wasn't this morning though, Anne, I'm not sure. Mark, frantic dog, scratching my leg to be lifted as stressed out during a Zoom call. Love it, Mark, absolutely. I got lifted and shown to the meeting. I got lifted and shown to the meeting. Love it. Mark, you got loads. Blew up 2 eggs in a saucepan as I forgot they were on. Yeah. Who else we got? Joanne Doolin, thank you, a lot of great takeaway, great. Okay, so we're wrapping up there naturally. So guys, listen, people complicate this space, even the idea of leading resilience. These are 5 courageous well-being conversations. Work them out for yourself because you're helping other people by working them out for yourself, and then have the conversations with others. Because I come from a family therapy background, and in that, it used to be quite complex. And at the end, we say things like, is there any interventions that could work? Well, if you want to make courageous well-being, leadership, resilience interventions, the conversations, the questions are the intervention. Even asking the questions and the answers you get, that is enough. You don't need to complicate the space anymore, and people will really enjoy it. You'll create psychological safety. You'll help all those areas. You'll help their energy, inner drive, flexibility, relationships. So can I thank you all very much, and I would wish you best of luck for the rest of the day. Thank you, guys.